let's talk about all the things that I read in March of 2023. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Chris, and today's video is the March 2023 wrap-up. I've finally broken the 6-book slog. I don't know what you would call it, but I could not read more than 6 books for a couple of months. I just didn't have time, motivation's not the right word, because I felt like I was still always reading, but I just wasn't able to get that 7th book in. But we did 7 in March, so I'm hoping that my must be read or TBR of April that has 8 books in it will be achievable. So before we jump into all the books that I read and very brief summaries, because I'm old now, my memory is failing, then check the description box down below for links to my social media and Discord, should you want to come along for the ride. I had a fairly decent reading month this month, had a couple of 3s, a couple of 3.5s, and one 4.5. Nothing quite hit that 5-star mark for me for one reason or another, but there were a couple of books in here that I really did enjoy. The next couple of months I've got a fair few review copies and beta reads and things going on, so I'm hoping that we'll get to have awesome reading months coming ahead. So the first book that I read, without any further ado, jumping into the list, is Keeper of the Keys by Janny Wurts. Now, I was nearly done with this one in February, and it carried over into March, the first couple of days of March, but I'm going to count it for the March TBR, just so I can get 7 books in there. This was the second installment of the Cycle of Fire by Janny Wurts, and we have moved away from, without going into spoiler territory, on Skari and his story, and we're really looking at Tayan and Jarek as they come into their powers and they start to really understand what their role is within the bigger plot line of this story. So we do follow the 2 young people as they touch sorcery and things like that, and Jarek comes to terms with what he needs to do to complete the Cycle of Fire, essentially, as he goes through. So I won't go into too much detail with that one because it is a book 2, but I blitzed this one. It is 350 pages or so, so it's not a huge book, but I think I read it in about 3 days, which has happened a couple of times in this month. I've just found books that really worked for me, and I read them quite quickly. So that was the first one off the bat for the month of March. The second book I read was from debut author Jessica A. McMinn. I will have a full review. Actually, the full review for this will go up earlier than this video, so you've already seen it. That is The Ruptured Sky. This is a, like I said, debut Aussie author. I reached out to her from a Facebook post. She said, would anybody have time to read an arc? And she was selecting people from there, and I was lucky enough to get a copy. The Ruptured Sky is a really exciting multi-POV story. It was fast-paced, queer normative. I really enjoyed it. I read it again in about 3 days, which is unheard of for me. It is one of those books that I could not put down. I thought I was going to sort of read it slowly with something else, and then I blitzed it. I couldn't put it down. Now, I will put in the cards up above the full review for that one because it's already come out, and I won't go too far into it. My first audiobook for the month was Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is, I'm not sure what the series is called, whether it's Cytonic, but it's a sci-fi YA book. This surprised me quite a lot. So my father-in-law sort of implored me to give Brando Sando a second chance. I read Mistborn. I thought the ending of Mistborn was brilliant, but I thought I didn't get the whole hype around Brandon Sanderson and his writing style, and to be honest, I still don't. But Skyward, I listened to it. It was very, very enjoyable. As a YA novel, I'm learning. It's a learning process to take myself out of adult brain and try and go into the book from the target audience's mindset when it comes to rating and reviewing a YA book. So Skyward follows Spencer, who really wants to be a fighter pilot, but her dad has been marked a coward from previous situations that happened, and she's basically just met with all of these roadblocks along the way. Spencer will not put up with those roadblocks, and she pushes and pushes and pushes to make her dreams come true, and she, discovers some things along the way. What I appreciated about Skyward was its accessibility. It was so easy to listen to. There was a decent amount of humor in the book to offset some of the more serious messages. So we had an AI called Mbot, who was this cheeky robot who had no feelings whatsoever, but often got his feelings hurt, and the conversations around that were quite fun. We had a lot of conversations surrounding friendship and not giving up, and adults having to admit when they were wrong and when they've had some past bias. So I think it was well worth it. I think for a younger audience, that book has a lot of good messages and was easy to follow. It was very accessible, to the point where I'm interested in continuing on with that series, and I'll probably go the audio route for that. The next one that I picked up shocked me. So this was a book that Roger and I were going to read. I thought it happened to be later in the year, but it ended up being in March, so I said, you know what, fine, I'll pick it up, and that was Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. I will say I've put Malazan off for so long because I was fairly intimidated by it and all of the things people had said about Malazan. I honestly got bogged down in, this is too dense for me, I'm too dumb of a fantasy reader to even understand or even try to understand what the actual Malazan is all about. But I loved Gardens of the Moon. I loved it so much. I don't think I got everything that happened in the book. I read this with both Roger and Mark Timoney, and as they were discussing things that they'd picked up, I was like, I did not get that. But it was fun to read it with people going through it for the first time, and also a seasoned Steven Erikson reader with Mark. So being able to bounce ideas off around, with them was awesome. I loved it. Essentially, I do not think this is as dense as people make it out to be personally, but I am a reader who does love to be dropped in the middle of a story and have to figure it out, and that absolutely happens here. Got a very vertical learning curve in that we are dropped into what is a D&D campaign, a very dark D&D campaign, and we're following, I would essentially say, two sets of characters or two parties as they go through their various stories. If you like an epic world, because there is a lot of epic scenes in this, it's epic world building, epic battle scenes, even though they're quite short, the stakes are really high. It's dripping with magic, and there are some cool magical elements to this story. I had a lot of fun with this, to the point where I'll be picking up Deadhouse Gates in April, and I've shafted the Wheel of Time read-along for now. So I will go back to Wheel of Time. I've read the first two books, but in terms of my brain being able to keep up with characters, I think that I need to read the second book of Malazan before I jump back into Wheel of Time. So I had a good time with Gardens of the Moon. Then I decided I needed something a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to pick up, and I hadn't at the time finished the Book of Words trilogy by J.V. Jones. So I read the book 1, Baker's Boy, in December of 2022, and I read A Man Betrayed in January, and then I did not read was it November, December, January that I was meant to do it? Maybe it was. I'm pretty sure I missed 2 months, and I hadn't finished the buddy read. So the person I was reading this one with over on the Discord also put this one down, and we both picked it up in March, so it just sort of worked out that way. So I have finished the trilogy. Master and Fool was a pretty good conclusion. I will say the series overall is a 3.5 for me. It was good. I enjoyed it. It doesn't necessarily do anything new for me personally, but it was easy to read. It was very comforting to read. If you're looking for a comforting fantasy that reads quite quickly, this is probably a good series to pick up. I had a good time with all 3 books. All of them read quite fast. All of them were sort of comforting 80s/90s fantasy, and it was a good time. But I don't have too much to say on this one because it is a book 3. But again, had a fairly decent time with that one. The second audiobook that I read, and I generally will have 2 audiobooks per month, depending on the time. If it's one that's like 40 hours, and I got no hope of getting the second one in, but I did pick up the second book in the Dragonlance trilogy. This is my beat-up copy, Dragons of Winter Night. I had some difficulty with the first book reading it physically, so I thought I would try the audio for book 2, and it did work for me a lot better. Again, we're following a very D&D mindset. It's what these books are based on, and our group from book 1 has split. The land that we're in is sort of ravaged by a war, and we get to see a lot more of our characters while we are hunting for the Dragon Orb in order to control the dragons, so there's a fight between good and evil dragons. One of my favourite characters from book 1 came back. I'm not going to say names for spoilers if you ever want to read this one, and I just love the dynamic that particular character has with Tasselhoff. I'm sure if you've read Dragonlance, you'll know who Tasselhoff is. He's just a charming little Kender who gets into a lot of trouble. But I had a much better time with the audio for book 2, and I will be continuing on with Dragons of Spring Dawning in April, and I will be doing that on audio as well. The last book that I read in the month of March, or the last completed book that I've read in the month of March, is The Empire's Bladesman. This is by Clay Vagrant. Now, this was a book that was given to me over on Epic Indie to review, and I had an okay time with it. The Empire's Bladesman is a Asian-inspired historical military fantasy, and it has a interesting take on vampires. So we are following Xiao Lian, who is a guard for the Ming Empire, and they have some very strong beliefs, and he's basically been given the task of taking down the Bloodfoot Syndicate, which is headed by Yang Bao. Yang Bao has unleashed an ancient creature, an ancient life force. I can't remember what it was called in the book. It started with A, and I couldn't pronounce it the whole way through, so my brain was like, information I don't need. But essentially, it is the head of the vampiric-like demons that we had in the story. So by unleashing this creature, he pulls 10 other crime syndicates under his wing and now has this huge empire of, criminal syndicates. Think sort of along the lines of Greenbone, where you've got different criminal organizations coming into play. So the story then becomes much bigger. Yang Biao has bitten off more than he can chew, and he's going to need the help of Xiao Lian to be able to basically save humanity. There are a few things that I quite liked about this book, and I will do a full review for The Empire's Bladesman, but one is going to be the horror elements. So the creatures in the battle scenes were quite well thought out, in my opinion, and the creatures were legitimately not fun to be around. So there was had a decent time with that one, but I did give it a 3-star just for some repetition, and some of the language didn't quite fit the overall tone of the story, which take me out of it a little bit. But overall, glad I read it. I'm not sure if I will continue on with that series, to be completely honest. So, those were the books that I read in March. What was your favourite read in the month of March? Please do let me know in the comments down below. Always love hearing what you're picking up and what you're reading. If you like the content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will. I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.